Seminole War origins: Negro Fort Massacre 1816. A single red-hot cannonball pierced the muggy, Florida air on July 27, 1816, striking Negro Fort's powder magazine with devastating precision. The explosion that followed claimed over 300 lives. In an instant, men, women, and children vanishing in a fireball that lit up the morning sky. The blast echoed across 100 miles of territory, its devastating power unmatched in the annals of American warfare. Welcome to Native Legends and History Stories. Join our community of history enthusiasts as we explore the profound moments that shaped our nation's past. Negro Fort stood as an imposing presence along the Apalachicola River in Spanish Florida's Panhandle. The British had constructed this fortress just 2 years earlier during their ambitious but failed campaign to reclaim the American colonies in the War of 1812. Now, its timber walls sheltered an extraordinary alliance. Choctaw natives fought alongside hundreds of fugitive slaves who had escaped from Spanish and American territories. These defenders transformed the abandoned British fortification into their sanctuary, their last stand for freedom. American Brigadier General Edmund Pendleton Gaines commanded the siege force with tactical precision. His 116 Army soldiers moved in coordinated efforts with more than 150 Kutha and Creek allies, their combined strength presenting a formidable threat to the fort's defenders. U.S. gunboats dominated the river, their 60-foot cannons capable of delivering devastating firepower. The vessels, each weighing over 25 tons and crewed by 50 sailors, demonstrated the full military might of the young American nation. Inside the fort, many defenders drew upon their experience fighting alongside British forces during the War of 1812. They maintained disciplined defense positions, managed their limited supplies, and held on to hope that their former British allies would return with reinforcements. This hope dimmed with each passing day as Britain, having abandoned its strategic interests in the region after the war's end, showed no signs of returning to their aid. Garsong, a 30-year-old former slave, emerged as the fort's commanding figure. His journey from skilled carpenter in Spanish-held Pensacola to military leader exemplified the extraordinary circumstances that brought these diverse defenders together. Under his command, the fort's occupants delivered an uncompromising message to the American forces: there would be no surrender, no quarter given or accepted. Each defender understood the grim reality. Capture meant returning to chains, back to the legal owners they had risked everything to escape. The territory surrounding Negro Fort had witnessed centuries of dramatic transformation. When the Spanish Empire first planted its flag in North America in the early 1500s, they encountered a complex network of indigenous societies. Their settlements at St. Mark's, St. Augustine, and Pensacola became critical footholds in the New World. Though Spanish influence rarely extended beyond these coastal strongholds, the arrival of European expeditions brought devastating waves of infectious diseases that decimated native populations. Vast stretches of L.A., Florida, once home to thriving indigenous communities, fell silent as disease claimed countless lives to the north. In lands that would later become Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi, the Creek people maintained their distinct way of life. Unlike the hierarchical structures of European societies, the Creeks organized themselves through an intricate confederacy of clans. Their social fabric drew strength from maternal lineages, with each clan tracing its origins to a shared female ancestor. This complex network of relationships created bonds more resilient than traditional power structures, enabling the Creek people to preserve their cultural identity despite mounting pressures from expanding colonial powers. As tensions mounted around Negro Fort, the defenders strengthened their fortifications, conducted strategic raids, and prepared for the inevitable assault. They stockpiled ammunition, positioned their artillery, and established defensive positions along the fort's walls. The American forces and their native allies maintained constant pressure, testing the defenders' resolve while searching for vulnerabilities. Each day brought new skirmishes, failed negotiations, and mounting casualties on both sides. The fort's diverse inhabitants created an unprecedented community. Choctaw warriors shared their intimate knowledge of the terrain and traditional combat techniques, with former slaves who contributed their experience with European military tactics. Together they maintained round-the-clock watches, repaired damage from enemy fire, and supported each other through the hardships of the siege. Their unity transcended the racial and cultural boundaries that dominated early American society, forging bonds strengthened by their shared struggle for freedom. The Creek Society's foundation rested upon an intricate system of clan relationships, bound together through strategic marriages that created what elders called the rope of Seine. The centuries-old practice wove their clans into a resilient social fabric, enabling them to present a unified front against external threats from both settlers and rival tribes. Each marriage between clans strengthened these bonds, creating a complex network of kinship that sustained their traditional way of life. However, the 1700s brought a profound transformation that would shake this ancient foundation. As cross-Atlantic trade intensified, high-ranking Creek families began acquiring African slaves, fundamentally altering their agricultural practices and social structure. Cotton plantations emerged across Creek territories, generating unprecedented wealth for these elite families. Some Creek plantation owners accumulated riches that dwarfed anything seen in their previous centuries of existence, creating stark economic divisions within their society. This adoption of slavery exposed a critical weakness in the Creek Confederation. While the rope of Cain had successfully united the clans for generations, their decentralized structure lacked a supreme authority capable of making binding decisions for all clans. The controversial practice of slave ownership created ideological rifts. Without a central authority to resolve the dispute, these divisions grew increasingly bitter, ultimately fracturing the Creek nation. The schism reached its breaking point when several Creek clans, rejecting the practice of slavery, chose exile over compromise. They migrated southward into Florida, where Spanish plagues had left vast territories depopulated and available for settlement. The Spanish colonists dubbed these newcomers Cimarron, meaning runaways or wild ones, a name that evolved into Seminole. In Florida, these breakaway Creeks established a distinctive society that blended their traditional practices with European agricultural techniques. Their communities became sanctuaries for escaped slaves from American, Spanish, and even Creek territories. These refugees, known as Black Seminoles, integrated into Seminole society under specific conditions. They maintained separate settlements, provided annual crop tributes, and pledged to fight alongside the Seminoles against American incursions. The relationship between the United States and these indigenous peoples grew increasingly hostile. The Red Sticks Creeks and emerging Seminoles engaged in numerous skirmishes and uprisings against American expansion. This tension culminated in the Red Stick War of 1813. A complex conflict that merged territorial disputes between the United States, Spain, and Great Britain with an internal Creek civil war. The war's conclusion brought devastating consequences for the Indigenous alliance. The Treaty of Fort Jackson, signed under Andrew Jackson's authority, forced the surrender of 21 million acres of valuable land in southern Georgia and central Alabama. This massive territorial concession came at a brutal cost. 2,000 casualties predominantly suffered by the forces opposing the United States. The treaty marked a pivotal moment in the systematic displacement of indigenous peoples from their ancestral lands, transforming the demographic and political landscape of the American Southeast. The complex web of alliances and conflicts in North America created a political landscape where loyalties shifted constantly. European powers formed and broke alliances with various tribes as circumstances demanded, while indigenous nations themselves split into competing factions. From this turbulent environment, the Red Stick War emerged as a turning point that brought the Seminole Nation into direct confrontation with General Andrew Jackson and the United States government. Jackson's military reputation had soared after his decisive victory over British forces at New Orleans, merely 18 months before the Negro Fort confrontation. His attention now turned to the Seminoles, whose actions had raised serious concerns in Washington. Their continued support of British interests, and more provocatively, their practice of harboring fugitive slaves, particularly rankled the general known as Old Hickory. The legal framework for action against Negro fort stemmed from the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793. This legislation empowered the government to capture and return escaped slaves to their owners while imposing penalties on anyone who assisted the fugitives. The fort, constructed by British forces in 1815, in what is now Franklin County, Florida, sheltered hundreds of escaped slaves who had previously fought alongside the British. In the War of 1812, its very existence challenged American authority and property laws. Military action against the fort required careful political maneuvering. As Commander-in-Chief, President James Madison held ultimate authority over any military expedition into Spanish territory. Madison had previously demonstrated his willingness to project American power, having authorized military support for anti-Spanish rebellions in West Florida. Initially, he approached the Negro fort situation with diplomatic restraint. However, by March 1816, his position hardened. Madison instructed Jackson to communicate with West Florida's governor, Mauricio de Zuniga, invoking international law to address what he termed an evil of so serious a nature. The question of congressional approval for military action remained unresolved. Jackson, characteristically aggressive in his approach, chose not to wait for explicit authorization. He proceeded to initiate military preparations, sending a pivotal message to General Gaines: "You possess the power of acting on your own discretion, which I hope you will exercise on this." Governor Zuniga's response to Jackson's diplomatic overture provided the final justification for military action. In formal correspondence, Zuniga declared that the Spanish government needed to destroy or remove from our frontier this banditry, put an end to an evil of so serious a nature, and return to our citizens and the friendly Indians inhabiting our territory those Negroes now in the said fort, and which have been stolen and enticed from them. With this Spanish endorsement, Jackson launched his operation in the final week of June 1816. A formidable naval force of U.S. gunboats and schooners set sail for Apalachicola Bay. These vessels, arriving on July 10th, represented significant military power. Each gunboat displaced over 25 tons and carried a crew of 50 sailors. Their armament included massive cannons extending more than 60 feet in length, making them formidable floating batteries capable of delivering devastating firepower against the fort's defenses. The U.S. naval fleet's destructive capability was unprecedented in the region. Each gunboat bristled with artillery that could reduce wooden fortifications to splinters within hours. These floating arsenals rendezvoused with Allied Creek, Chief L.A. Farca, at the Apalachicola's mouth, establishing a formidable blockade that would prevent any escape by water. Colonel Clinch orchestrated the ground campaign with methodical precision. On July 17th, he led his force of 116 men south from Camp Crawford. Their flatboats, reinforced with iron plates and armed with swivel guns. The boats moved silently through the dark waters, their crews maintaining strict silence to preserve the element of surprise. Each vessel carried additional ammunition and supplies, preparing for what could become a prolonged siege. The American force grew stronger as Chief William McIntosh arrived with 150 battle-hardened Coweta warriors. The following day, another Creek detachment joined, under the fierce commander known as Mad Tyke, whose reputation for tracking fleeing slaves was well documented. Clint had negotiated a precise arrangement with the native chiefs. $50 would be paid for each captured slave, a considerable sum that motivated their warriors. Additionally, the chief secured first rights to any spoils found within the fort after its capture, ensuring their warriors' loyal service. The first blood was drawn on July 15th. American gunboats and schooners advancing upriver encountered a group of men hauling a small vessel ashore. One American boat moved to investigate, rowing closer through the morning mist. Without warning, musket balls tore through the air, peppering the approaching vessel. The Americans returned fire, but the attackers had already melted back into the dense riverbank vegetation. 2 days later, the conflict escalated dramatically. Sailing Master Loomis, seeking to replenish his fleet's water supplies, dispatched for sailors upriver in a small boat. The sailors spotted a solitary black man on the riverbank, an apparently easy opportunity to gather intelligence. As they docked their vessel and approached him, their fatal mistake became clear. 40 armed men, both black defenders and native allies, emerged from concealed positions, their muskets at the ready. Their leader, Garsong, personally commanded this ambush force. The trap was sprung with lethal efficiency. 3 sailors fell instantly under the coordinated volley. John Lopez, though wounded, displayed remarkable survival instinct, plunging into the river and swimming to safety. Despite his injuries, the 4th sailor, Edward Daniels, suffered the most horrific fate. Captured alive, he was dragged to the fort, where his captors subjected him to brutal torture, covered in hot tar, and burned alive as a warning to other would-be attackers. In the days that followed, the American Native Alliance mounted aggressive patrols to intercept escapees from the fort. Their efforts yielded a macabre success when McIntosh's Cavita warriors captured a fleeing defender carrying Edward Daniels' scalp. The gruesome trophy had been intended to rally the Seminoles, demonstrating the defenders' commitment to their cause. Instead, it served to harden the resolve of the attacking forces. The fort's defenders made extensive use of their British-supplied arsenal to keep their enemies at bay. Their walls bristled with artillery, everything from traditional cannon shot to grape shot and military rockets. The Americans and their native allies adapted their tactics accordingly, maintaining safe distances while allowing the defenders to expend their precious ammunition. Every shot fired from the fort's walls meant one less round available for the crucial battles to come. Tension peaked when the fort's black defenders, likely recognizing the strategy to deplete their supplies, launched a bold offensive against the Cavita warriors' positions. The assault evolved into one of the most savage engagements of the siege. The close-quarters combat rendered muskets nearly useless, forcing warriors on both sides to rely on tomahawks and knives. Blood-curdling war cries mixed with the sounds of steel on steel as the two forces clashed in the underbrush. For 3 consecutive days, the forest around Negro Fort echoed with the sounds of this brutal combat. The black defenders, many hardened by their previous military service with British forces, matched the Cavita warriors in ferocity and skill. However, the superior numbers and woodland fighting expertise of the Cavita warriors gradually turned the tide. The defenders, who had earned the moniker Maroons for their independent spirit and fierce resistance, eventually retreated to the safety of their fortress walls, having demonstrated both their courage and their tactical limitations. Dr. Buck, an American military physician attached to Clinch's forces, witnessed the prolonged combat from his position, tending to wounded soldiers. His detailed journal would later provide crucial insights into the siege's final days. After observing the ferocious hand-to-hand fighting, he wrote, "Even though they were Indians, Negroes and our enemies," he wrote, "it was clear they were determined to fight to the end and never to be taken alive." This observation would prove prophetic in the days to come. McIntosh adopted scorched earth tactics, methodically destroying every resource around the fort. His warriors raised cornfields, slaughtered livestock, and burned fruit orchards, creating a stark ring of devastation around the stronghold. This systematic destruction served both practical and psychological purposes, denying supplies to the defenders while demonstrating the attackers' ruthless determination. A delegation of native leaders approached the fort under a flag of truce, hoping to negotiate surrender. They were met by Garsong himself, whose response reflected both defiance and desperate hope. Standing atop the fort's walls, he proclaimed his authority derived directly from the British government, declaring his orders were to sink any American vessel attempting passage. Though the British had abandoned the fort over a year ago after the War of 18 conclusion, Garsong and his followers clung to the possibility of British reinforcement. Their determination was fueled by the grim alternative. Surrender meant returning to chains, back to the legal slaveholders they had risked everything to escape. On July 26, the siege entered its final phase, as Clint's army merged with Loomis's naval forces several miles below Prospect Bluff. Through the night, soldiers moved stealthily to reinforce the Cowitas under McIntosh at the fort's rear. establishing a complete encirclement. The defenders, now surrounded, maintained constant vigilance, their shadows visible by torchlight, as they manned the walls. Dawn on July 27 brought the decisive engagement. American gunboats took up positions along the river, their heavy guns within direct range of the fort's walls. The defenders responded immediately, their cannons unleashing a furious barrage against the American positions. Despite the intensity of their fire, most shots fell short or wide, creating geysers of water and mud, but inflicting minimal damage. Loomis positioned his vessels at what he described as point-blank range, close enough to see individual defenders moving along the fort's walls. For a full hour, the air filled with the thunder of opposing batteries. Cannon smoke drifted thick across the battlefield as both sides exchanged concentrated fire, neither gaining decisive advantage. The fort's walls, though wooden, proved remarkably resilient against conventional shot. The tactical breakthrough came from an innovative solution aboard gunboat 154. The sailing master, recognizing the stalemate, ordered the creation of a makeshift furnace to heat their cannonballs. As morning dew still clung to the grass and humidity hung heavy in the Florida summer air, crews worked frantically to bring the shot to glowing temperature. The decisive round lifted from the gunboat's cannon in a cloud of smoke and flame. Its trajectory carried it in a perfect arc above the fort's outer defenses, its superheated mass glowing malevolently against the morning sky. Time seemed to slow as the projectile reached its apex, then descended with lethal accuracy toward the fort's powder magazine. The impact triggered a catastrophe of unprecedented scale. The explosion's concussion wave flattened trees and shattered windows miles away. A massive fireball erupted skyward, visible across vast distances, as hundreds of barrels of gunpowder detonated simultaneously in that singular apocalyptic moment. Hundreds of lives, men, women, and children who had found refuge within the fort's walls were obliterated. The blast was so massive that witnesses reported hearing it from up to 100 miles away, its echo rolling across the Florida territory like distant thunder. The human cost was beyond comprehension. Bodies and debris were hurled hundreds of feet into the air, raining down across the battlefield. The fort, which had stood as a symbol of resistance and hope for hundreds of fugitive slaves, was transformed in an instant into a scene of unprecedented devastation. The single shot had achieved what weeks of conventional bombardment could not, bringing the siege to an abrupt and horrific conclusion that would haunt witnesses for years to come. Dr. Buck stood frozen before the apocalyptic scene, his medical training offering no preparation for the scale of devastation. Before him, you cannot conceive. Nor I describe the horrors of the scene, he wrote in shaking hand. In an instant, hundreds of lifeless bodies were stretched upon the plain, buried in sand and rubbish, or suspended from the tops of the surrounding pines. The American soldiers, though victorious, fell silent at the sight, their initial relief giving way to stunned horror. Even hardened veterans paused in their celebration to mourn the devastating toll. Of the approximately 300 fugitive slaves and 25 Choctaw allies within the fort during the explosion, barely 25 souls survived the inferno. Their reprieve proved tragically brief. McIntosh's Cavita warriors, acting with savage efficiency, began slaughtering the survivors before they could even climb free from the smoking ruins. Colonel Clinch rushed into the devastation, demanding an end to the bloodshed. His motivations remain disputed. Some credit his basic humanity, while others suggest he simply wanted to preserve valuable property.